Hey guys, at this point I hope your quiz went well. We'll get that graded and into Canvas pretty quickly. So for this lesson you're going to need to have out the following. Let's see. You'll have your PPTs that you did in Bell Work and SQ93. We're also going to be checking at worksheet 39 and be adding a few more things to it as well. So have all that ready to go. So here we go. When we ended chapter 5, we saw that the colonists were up in arms about Lexington and Concord, up in arms literally, about Lexington and Concord, and that the British had retreated back to Boston. If you'll recall, they were harassed the whole way back. A lot of guerrilla attacks from the colonists and the villages as they made their way back, but now they're really entrenched in Boston at Charlestown Peninsula. You'll get a little better idea of the geography of the city of Boston as we go along. So the colonists are quite outraged at the cruelty they'd been treated with by the British, and yet not all colonists were thinking that it was time to leave the British Empire. They still wanted to make an attempt to make peace with the king and say, we want to be your loyal subjects, but we need to be treated like full-fledged British citizens. So there's things going on in this chapter on the battlefield and politically back in Philadelphia as the Continental Congresses are trying to make plans, trying to make peace first, and then trying to wage a war when that doesn't work. So we're going to be doing snapshots of both the battlefield scenes and the political scenes too. So it's kind of a switch off for a while here as we begin chapter 6. Well, when you think about the colonies leaving an empire, it might come to mind that, well, I thought Christians were supposed to be, respectful to the government, and that is certainly some pause for thought when you think about rebelling against a government. Is that a Christian response? So I have this little talk show video that I want to show you. So I'm going to get the lights out and get that going, and hopefully it'll show well. Well, it's frozen. Let's go back. Let me try that.
Welcome to today's episode of The Breakdown, breaking down history one view at a time. I have with me today an expert on ethics and American liberty, Christine Lewis. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Not sure what's going on here. Oh well.
Welcome to today's episode of The Breakdown, breaking down history one view at a time. I have with me today an expert on ethics and American liberty, Christine Lewis. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Mason. I'm always thrilled to be part of an ethical discussion.
Well, it's much better than an unethical one. But to the topic at hand, we're going to discuss the ethics of rebellion.
Sounds pretty bad.
But what if we're talking about the rebellion of the colonies against King George III? Was that ethical?
You know, that's hard because there are good arguments on both sides.
Well, let's start by focusing on the colonists as citizens of Great Britain. Isn't it wrong to disobey the government?
Well, the way you put it, according to Romans 13, of course it's wrong to disobey.
The way I put it, well, how would you put it?
You're acting like the colonies were an integral part of Great Britain. A lot of the colonists thought of themselves a little more independently than that.
How so?
They were used to free trade and free elections and freedom in general. Taking away their liberty was pretty tyrannical, really.
But aren't Christians supposed to submit to the king as supreme? You know, to the good and gentle as well as to the froward.
You nailed the issue there. The truth is, it depends on if you think of the colonies as rebelling against Britain or defending themselves.
Defending themselves? Against what? Weren't the colonists the ones who tarred and feathered tax collectors and refused to pay their taxes?
Some did, sure. There were always some rebels, some that went over the top. but the leadership was really trying to reconcile things as much as possible. I mean, just look at the Olive Branch petition.
Yeah, let's take a look at the Olive Branch petition and see what the Founding Fathers had to say. We solemnly assure your majesty that we most ardently desire the former harmony between her and these colonies may be restored.
And that was a later attempt at reconciliation. They'd petitioned before, they sent Ben Franklin over to speak to Parliament. In the end, they really didn't have much of a choice in the matter.
Oh, hate to put you on hold, Chris, but looks like someone has posted a question on our site. Brent4890 has this to say. Wasn't the war already started when the Olive Branch petition was sent? And with the Americans the first ones to fire a shot at Lexington and Concord? Sounds like we're the ones that started the war here. Good question. Who began the fight, Chris?
Well, fighting had broken out before the Olive Branch petition, but just barely before. In fact, the petition was kind of a response to the conflict, wanting to stop it before it became a long, drawn-out war. Besides, we'd been petitioning all along the way, and Parliament still forced Americans to house British soldiers and infringed on their other liberties. Colonists viewed these things as breaking British law, since as British citizens, they were entitled to a right to private property and a right to fair trial.
So they just up and attacked the government.
Not quite. They continued to petition. Sure, the situation was tense, but the British were the ones to make the first move. They marched against Concord, where they were met by the militia. And as far as we know, the British were the ones who fired the first shot.
Really?
We honestly don't know for sure, but the captain who led the American militia claimed afterwards that he'd planned to withdraw, and the British fired upon them. In any case, through colonial writings, you can see that the Founding Fathers always thought they were fighting a defensive war. Britain was the aggressor, and they were merely protecting their lands, their rights, and their families.
This is really interesting stuff, Chris, but I'm afraid we're going to have to cut things short here. It's time for a commercial break. We'll have more when we come back, so don't go far.
Okay, there's no commercial break, but maybe we could do a little song and dance. So let's get started, making sure you have all these things ready, and we'll get going on chapter 6. Independence for the colonies. Now, the section you guys read for today was called Moving Toward Independence. So let's get going. Now, if you recall, I don't know if you recall the date of Lexington and Concord, but it was April the 18th, 19th. But by May, they're moving toward trying to reconcile. So you saw in the little talk show video that she said that the Olive Branch petition was a response to the conflict, and it really and truly was. So just early in May, the Second Continental Congress, and that's your first PPT of the day, these are representatives from all of the colonies who are meeting to try to decide what to do with their membership in the British Empire. So they come together in May of 1775, and they write something called the Olive Branch Petition, number 2. Now, the olive branch is an ancient symbol of peace. When one ruler extended a literal piece of branch from an olive tree to the foe they'd been fighting, that meant we're done fighting. So when the colonists wrote this olive branch petition to the king, they're really trying to assert that we want to stay part of this empire. We want to restore good fellowship between us and you. So it conveys a desire for peace. It also asks them to have their rights as British citizens restored. But the king at this point is done with them. He said he won't even look at the olive branch petition. He refused to even receive the messengers who came over the ocean with it. And this is, delivering a message like this is at least a 4 to 6 week process. Getting on a boat with it and getting across the ocean, it's a major ordeal. And then for the king to just refuse them, didn't even look at it. So while this Second Continental Congress is meeting, remember back in chapter 5, they met the first time and they made a plan to meet a second time just in case they needed to. Well, this is the second time, and they're now called the Second Continental Congress. It's likely much the same men that were in that very first Continental Congress. But here they are assembled again. So while they're waiting for a response from King George, they go ahead and make plans to build an army. Now, they really had not had an army, a professional army at all. They'd been relying upon, just colonial militia. But now they're going to create a full-time professional army, and it's going to be called the Continental Army. And so that is your number 3, PPT, Continental Army. The Congress chooses George Washington to be the commander-in-chief. From his experience in the French and Indian War and beyond, he's been chosen to lead this effort. So now a full-time professional army to be formed up under the leadership of George Washington. Now, when the king refused to see that petition, he goes even further than not even giving an answer. He gives an answer called the Prohibitory Act, and he is going to prevent any kind of trade between England and the colonies, cutting off all trade. And that's going to hurt, well, it's going to hurt his own merchants too back in England, but it's going to really hurt the colonial merchants as well. So King George III is playing nasty. Then he just demands submission. He's like not giving in at all here. The colonists at that point had to choose between submitting to a king who is not too amenable toward them, or fighting for their independence. I don't know if any of you are Hamilton fans, the musical, but this is a meme from, King George has a solo in there where he'll send a fully armed battalion to remind the colonies of his love. Great tough love that he shows there, and he really does. So it's really on between them. So let's look at the early military action. It all starts up there around the Boston area, and even further north from that too. We will do your map here in just a little bit to help you get familiar with the area. Well, Fort Ticonderoga is situated on Lake Champlain, which you had to label on your map. It's just kind of a northern extension of the Hudson River that goes all the way through New York. And Fort Ticonderoga is right on the banks of that, and it will help whoever controls it to control the waterways. Now, that's an important waterway to control, because if the Hudson River falls into British hands, they can effectively cut off all of the northern colonies from every other colony if they control that waterway. So seeing that, Ethan Allen, who is a leader of the Green Mountain Boys, which is just a group of kind of a soldier military type of group who've been patrolling out in the Vermont territories, trying to keep their eye out for, French or whoever's trying to take the land from them. So they're already kind of in that area to start with, and so they're making their way to Fort Ticonderoga, but so is Benedict Arnold. Let's see, do you have to define him? Yes, number 6. Benedict Arnold's actually appointed by the Continental Congress to collect some men as he makes his way toward Fort Ticonderoga and to take the fort. Remember, Ethan Allen's already on that mission, but he's the one who appointed himself to do that. So when Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen's men meet up on their way to Fort Ticonderoga, Arnold shows them his papers. I've been commissioned to take this fort. Well, Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys are like, no, you're not. We're not going to fight for anybody except for our guy, Ethan Allen. So Benedict Arnold, a bit of humiliation there, has to kind of bend to their wishes, and they together jointly go and take over Fort Ticonderoga. And it's not even close. Like, they catch them sleeping. They catch the British sleeping in the fort. They don't even really have to fire a shot. Got some really good video. I'm going to show you this later, but it becomes a real humiliation for Benedict Arnold, how he gets treated in this victory. He never is given credit for it either. Then another fort that's close by, Fort Crown Point, located right on the river as well, there at Lake Champlain, they take it as well. So now they have confidence that they have control of this waterway and that the colonies are not going to get cut off from each other. Taking Fort Ticonderoga proves useful later for all the stuff that's stored there, the cannon, the artillery, the ammunition. They're going to need it later to fight the British. So looking at our locations here, here's the British are hunkered down here in Boston. Here's New York in the Hudson River. Lake Champlain is just north of that. And you can see Fort Ticonderoga and Fort Crown Point are just 2 points that are really close together there, and they do take both of those under Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold's leadership. But the British are still in Boston, so they've got to figure that out. All right. So let's look at what's called the Battle of Bunker Hill, which is actually the wrong name for it because that's not the hill they finally decided to fight on, but let's talk about it. All right, so down here is Charlestown Peninsula. It's actually connected to the shore with a really skinny little piece of land back down here, but this is where the British are completely occupying everything. They've got their ships here bringing them supplies. They've got a little bit entrenched here. Well, the Americans, or the colonists, have come from a northern route, and this is the hill they started on. This one's actually called Bunker Hill, but they move a hill closer to one called Breed's Hill so they can get closer in range with their weapons. But it had already been written down as Bunker Hill, so they never changed the name to it, but it's actually the Breed's Hill. So the Patriots are entrenched on both these hills, mostly at Breed's Hill, and they've dug trenches. I literally mean entrenched. They've dug earthworks where they can bury themselves up chest height and have really great shelter from being fired at, and they're up on the high ground, which is very desirable in a fighting situation. Thomas Gage, the guy who attacked them at Lexington and Concord, orders his men, and General William Howe had brought more men to reinforce him, orders his men to march up the hill and take them. Well, up they go. And the colonists fire back down at them, and defeat that first run of troops. Howe engaged in another group up. And again, the colonists are able to shoot and kill a bunch of them, and they don't take the hill again. So Howe engaged and then sent a third attack up the hill, up to Breed's Hill, and this time disaster hits. The colonists actually run out of ammunition, and they have to vacate the hill. So a victory in battle is determined by who takes the ground, and of course the British do take the ground, although they have way more casualties, more deaths and more injuries than the colonists do, yet they now claim it. So here we are with a hard-fought battle, and the colonists have lost it. They still have not gotten the British out of Boston. So the Continentals were forced to retreat on the third charge after running out of ammunition. Very sad. The British won, but at a tremendous cost. The casualties were way more for the British, and very few for the colonists, actually, or the Continentals, we'll call them now. So that's the Battle of Bunker Hill. Should be called the Battle of Breed's Hill. The British had also tried to reinforce their folks by hiring some soldiers. Now, you have a PPT number 8 called mercenaries, and mercenaries are just simply soldiers that are hired. These are not soldiers who are from Britain. They don't really have a care about who wins. They're just fighting for the side that's paying their salary. So hired soldiers, and in this case, they hired some from a region in Germany called Hessia. And so these guys are called Hessians. They are fearsome looking guys. Now their party hats look a little funny to us, but they made them look enormous, and they're metal, they're solid metal, made them look really, really tall, and they were fearless fighters. So for the British to add them to their side was going to be a big help to the British, and not a good thing for the colonists. So now the Hessians. They're cool hats and cool mustaches. They're the kind that go in the handlebars, out there. Many of them had those big giant mustaches too. They were very fearsome looking guys. So the colonists, Continentals, decide we'll go up into Canada, and if we can, remember Britain now owns all of that, that they'd won from France 20 years before, and they think, well, there's probably still a lot of people up there that hate the British, that would like, and they've been treated like we have too. So maybe we can get a lot of help if we go up to Canada. So they devise a plan to try to take out Montreal and Quebec. And remember, both of those cities are on the St. Lawrence River, so having control of that waterway will be a big help. So it's going to be one general bringing troops up this way, another general bringing troops up this way, and they're going to rendezvous at Quebec at a certain time. So Schuyler captures Fort St. John and Montreal. Now this is Continental, so this is good. This is a Continental victory. Although Schuyler falls ill and has to be replaced by General Montgomery. So I put a slash there so you'll know that's the same position, but he had a replacement because of illness of Schuyler. All right, so Montgomery's coming up from this side, and Benedict Arnold is coming up from the east side, and they're going to rendezvous at Quebec. Well, Benedict Arnold gets slowed down because of frozen rivers and slow-moving stuff, so it took till like the end of December before they could even get there. And of course, you know, Canadian winters are pretty famous, and they go ahead and attack in a blinding snowstorm, and it was a disaster. Montgomery gets killed, and Benedict Arnold catches a musket ball in his femur, the big bone in his thigh, and it shatters that bone. He's got a limp the rest of his life, so he's, you know, being dragged from the field, and they suffer a humiliating defeat there by the British. They also contract smallpox, which is very contagious, and they just kind of all fall back now to Fort Ticonderoga to lick their wounds a bit. They learned a healthy respect for the British, and they never again tried to attack Canada in this war. So while some initial success with Montreal, Quebec is a disaster, and they fail to capture Canada, and Britain gets to keep using it as a base of operations. All right, so here was where I was talking about with it. So we talked about Fort Ticonderoga and Crown Point. Here's Fort St. John in Montreal that Schuyler / Montgomery takes. We got Benedict Arnold coming up this way, and they rendezvous in Quebec, but notice that is a red symbol there. If you can see it, I know there's a glare sometimes, but it's a disaster for the Continentals. Well, still got the problem of the British soldiers still being in Boston, and they really want to get them out. It's been nearly a year now since they've been occupying there. They couldn't do it at Bunker Hill. They couldn't do it at Lexington and Concord, and now they've just got to have a plan to do it. Well, this is one of my favorite stories of the whole war. This little guy here, well, he wasn't too little this way, but he was pretty short. He's a short, bookseller turned general in the army, and he actually volunteers to take some men and some sledges, which are like sleds, like heavy-duty sleds pulled by oxen, to Fort Ticonderoga, get all the artillery and ammo that's being stored there, and bring it back to Boston. Now we're talking about 300 miles here in the winter, over mountains, over frozen rivers, and he does it. He brings back 60 tons. I'm talking 120,000 pounds of artillery back to Boston. And so here's Fort Ticonderoga. They make their way along the river, the Hudson River, and cut through, I guess that's Pennsylvania. Not sure. No, that's the whole width of Massachusetts there. Get to the coastline and park those cannons up on the heights. Now, I told you the British are occupying Charlestown Peninsula. It's low lying out in the water, and there are kind of cliffs around there too. And they park the cannons up on those heights there. And when the British awaken the next morning and see those cannons pointed at them, and they can't reach them, they just set sail. They get on their boats and set sail for New York, and that's where they're going to try to focus their attack. Now, it also mentions that about 1,000 loyalists left with the British troops. Now, loyalists, I think that's your last PPT, number 9, these are people who remained loyal to the British Crown. They never were in favor of this war for independence and decided that it was better to stay with the British on the British side. So they're vacating their homes. They're leaving everything. That's kind of sad to me because they've been there for so long. But they leave with the British, fearing that they'll be attacked by the Continentals. They set sail for New York, or they go north to Nova Scotia in Canada, where they can be protected by the British troops. Well, that's the end of the section. Let's do a couple things. We'll get to your SQ with a Kahoot here in just a minute, but let's look at worksheet 39. I hope you can see this okay on this video. I wanted to check what you were supposed to do for homework that was assigned after the test, just putting some labels on there. And then we're going to add a little bit more as well. So let me get rid of this. Now, please don't start writing everything you see on this map. Only stick with me and check the things that I've got here for you. Let me get this a little bit bigger. All right, so for number 1, you had to label bodies of water. This is Lake Champlain, this one right here. Right here. This is down from it, the Hudson River. Goes all the way through New York. Here at the Atlantic Ocean, it empties out. And then just over from it, kind of in an angle, is the Delaware River. It forms the boundary between Pennsylvania and New Jersey and empties out down here in the Atlantic Ocean. Here's Delaware, it's named after that. So this is the Delaware River. Those were number 1, the bodies of water that you were supposed to have labeled. Now, you needed to put some dots and labels with these 3 items. One of them was Boston, so black dot there for Boston. It's right on the coastline where Massachusetts goes in at its sharpest angle. There's your Boston. Albany, if you kind of measure the distance of the Hudson River, it's about halfway. So Albany right on the Hudson River. And then Valley Forge, at the Delaware River, then there's a tributary there, it's like right below that. So now I want you to no longer look at this part of the map. I want to show you only what we're going to show you. I want us to map the action that we just talked about today so you can kind of see the geography of that. So we're only going to do those battles that were up in the north for now. All right, so so we've got Boston. We know Bunker Hill was a British victory, so you need to put a red. I forgot to mention you need colored pencils. But since you're copying it, maybe you could just use your red pen on that. You need a red and a blue. Blue's going to be for colonial or continental victories, and red's going to be for British victories. So Bunker Hill's right here at Boston. So I did like an asterisk or an explosion to show a battle, and that one almost won by the Continentals, but remember the British took the hill, so they technically get it. We talked about trying to win in Canada. Now Montreal was a victory for the Continentals under Schuyler/Montgomery, so it's a blue one. It's right there on the St. Lawrence River, where it kind of goes wide, you can see. right before it branches off into two. There's Montreal. That's a blue Victory. Just go up the river a ways. There's Quebec. I did a explosion, I guess, and it's definitely red. Remember, Montgomery's killed, and Benedict Arnold is wounded seriously. It took him forever to recover, and it was a disastrous red victory. All right, then that's all the locations that we talked about. Now, the next thing is to take another color, and it doesn't matter what color. You can just use your regular pencil if you want to. And you're going to draw an arrow in the order that these military actions, these battles happened. Bunker Hill was first. That's why I have a number 1 at it. So we're going to start there. The second battle was Montreal, so just draw a line up there. I put a number 2. You might want to put a number 2 there as well. And draw your line up to the third location of battles, Quebec. And then the arrow ends at driving the British out of Boston, thanks to Henry Knox getting the artillery from Fort Ticonderoga. This is where he brought it from. I mean, just look, Fort Ticonderoga is like right here. And he came all the way, like 300 miles, over frozenness. I just think that's awesomeness. Alright, so there's your map. And we've completed just 3 and 4 for just the northern battles. We'll keep adding, as we study the different region battles, we'll keep adding those to it as well. Alright, so you're going to Kahoot your SQ, page 93, and then there's some video I want you to watch it, and I want you watching it, no heads down, Chris Gerlach. And the first one's just a few minutes to finish up what's going on in Boston, and then it's a whole 45-minute episode of Rebellion to Revolution. It's all wonderful History Channel stuff. It'll really help you understand it, so I need your full attention while it's being watched. If I get reports that you're not really watching it, I'm going to ask him to make you take notes on it. So that's an option. Not cool option. I think you guys can do it without having to take notes. So just maybe 5 or 6 minutes of this one, and then a little more. But now, it's time to Kahoot. See you guys. See you soon. I'm excited to come back soon.